Madame la sénatrice, le plancher est à
Oui,
vous. Le plancher est à vous.
merci. Membre de la presse canadien et canadienne, bonjour. Je suis la sénatrice indépendante Pierrette Ringuette du Nouveau-Brunswick et je suis heureuse de supporter un groupe d'experts, des bénévoles qui, comme moi, ne supportons pas la relocalisation de la résidence officielle de nos premiers ministres. Depuis 2016, nous avons assumé que le 24 Sussex était en rénovation. I am proud to participate today with an expert volunteer panel who will provide their perspective on the many fronts that must be considered. And in speaking order, they are the Historic Ottawa Development Inc. President, Marc Denhez, and the 24 Sussex Project Director, Ken Grafton, will tackle the issues of security and cost. The National Trust will talk about carbon footprint. And we will have Christina Cameron, heritage expert, that will review governance issue and legislative status for the Prime Minister residence. We also have Trace Architectures, Marc Brandt, that will give us an update on a proposal for the restoration of 24 Sussex. And the cherry on the cake, Rockcliffe Park Residents Association President Russell Gibson. So, gentlemen and ladies, the floor is now yours.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Marc Denhez, je suis président de Historic Ottawa Development Inc. et je tiens à remercier la sénatrice ainsi que tous les médias qui s'intéressent au sort de l'immeuble qui, en droit et en raison de la loi sur les résidences officielles, est la demeure des premiers ministres du Canada. J'ai également l'honneur de souligner la présence de Catherine Spencer-Ross, présidente de Patrimoine Ottawa, Heritage Ottawa, qui sera disponible pour commenter les propos d'aujourd'hui. HODI, Historic Ottawa Development Inc., is interested in the business case, comparing fix-up with the alternative, a proposed new building in parkland to be bulldozed out of Rockcliffe Park. What's that cost? With reception facilities for 125 guests competing with Rideau Hall, NCC reported so-called replacement cost for 24 Sussex at $40.1 million, but otherwise figures have apparently been a state secret. HODI suspects one reason, that taxpayers would be shocked at the final price tag, while the breakdown for fix-up, supposedly totaling $36.6 million, was another state secret. So our first point is that Canadians have seen no evidence that this new build would cost a nickel less than fix-up. Our second point is bigger. It's that in place of evidence, some officials appear to rely on a myth dating from about a century ago. When faced with fix-up, it's always easier and cheaper to knock the thing down and start over than it is to try to fix the thing. This is a dilemma of national proportions, because among Canada's 15 million dwellings, CMHC says millions, are in visible need of repair. If this is leadership by example, these officials are telling Canadians in the middle of a housing crunch that if your property is in disrepair, just let it fall down until you can take it to the dump. We say no. 24 Sussex is our line in the sand. 24 Sussex is where we propose to tackle that myth head on. 24 Sussex is where we propose to demonstrate to Canadians that it's no accident that the Canadian renovation industry is worth $160 billion a year, which, with exemplary cooperation from the new construction industry, is working on these problems. And most importantly, 24 Sussex is where we prove that Canada has the skills to fix these things on a budget, on condition that you look in the right place. So bottom line, 24 Sussex is the best place in Canada to showcase how fix-up in the right hands can sustain and improve Canada's housing stock, starting with the highest profile house in the country, the official residence of our Prime Ministers. I turn the floor over to my colleague Ken Grafton from Historic Ottawa.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I'm going to speak to cost briefly, the $37 million sticker shock number that has been so widely reported. I'm not sure why, but last week Michael Wernick, former clerk of the Privy Council, spoke out in a CBC interview about 24 Sussex and commented on the security aspects of that. And the statement he made was that that site, 24 Sussex, would basically be impossible to make secure at a reasonable cost. So I have a question this afternoon for my fellow taxpayers in Canada, and that's, in what alternate universe is it going to be cheaper for us to, one, build a new residence, two, then maintain two public buildings instead of one public building, and then renovate 24 Sussex anyway for the new tenant, rather than just doing the last thing, renovating 24 Sussex. This is new age post-truth math, and it's complete nonsense. Logic and proportion have fallen sloppy dead at the gates of 24 Sussex. So where does this number come from, the 37 million? It originates with an NCC report, the 2021 Asset Portfolio Condition Report for the Official Residences of Canada. In that report, it cites a number of $36.64 million for what they refer to as deferred maintenance, a euphemism for property neglect. And that number is specifically exclusive of security, grounds, pool, and site infrastructure. So it's just renovating the main residence at 24 Sussex. $37 million to renovate an 11,000 square foot home. So I would ask you to close your eyes and try to imagine renovating your 2,500 square foot home, which is something just less than a quarter of 11,000 square feet, and spending $9 million renovating your house. What could you possibly spend that money on? Even if you parked a new hypercar in the driveway, you'd still have a lot of money left over. That puts it into perspective. Try imagining spending $3 million renovating a 1,000 square foot condominium. What could you possibly spend that money on? So this report, the 2021 Asset Portfolio Condition Report, refers to a number of other reports, the 2018 report and a Turner and Townsend report. And these two reports tell us what happened to that number to get to 37 million. Basically, it contains up to 70% contingencies and soft costs. If you subtract that from 37 million, you're down around $10.5 million, which was in fact the widely reported cost estimate in 2008. Just in closing, I would like to say that rats, the presence of rodents in a building, speak to pest control, poor pest control rather than the condition of the building. And I think most Canadians would call an exterminator rather than a demolition contractor. And with that, I'll turn it over to Natalie from National Trust.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. My colleagues here today from HODI are in a strong position to make the business case for rehabilitating 24 Sussex. And certainly the heritage value of this iconic property is without question. 24 Sussex is a landmark and a touchstone with people and events that have shaped our national story. It's the real thing with layers of history intact, not just a reference on a plaque or a photo in the archives. Today, I want to make the point that the decision about the future of 24 Sussex is as much about carbon as it is about money or heritage value. And together, these three factors point clearly to the imperative to invest and reuse this building. With the climate emergency the most pressing issue of our time, and the World Watch Institute estimating that the planet will have run out of raw building materials by the year 2030, every decision about the future of an existing building needs careful scrutiny. Measuring the upfront carbon emissions of every new building project and comparing it to retaining the existing building almost always points to the imperative of reuse. Witness the recent high-profile rejection of Marks & Spencer's proposal to demolish and replace their main store in London, rejected on the basis of the carbon impacts alone. 24 Sussex should be no exception to the reuse imperative. Indeed, it's a high-profile opportunity for the government to follow through on the intent of its new standards on embodied carbon in construction and send a strong message against the disposability of existing buildings, our largest consumer good. Committing to give 24 Sussex a future and showing Canadians that even special designated buildings can be adapted with flexibility, site intensification, and thoughtful building additions is the best message government can send now for all buildings. Thank you. And now Christina Cameron.
Thank you, Natalie, and I'm pleased to be with you today. I have the role of speaking about laws and policies. And to be clear, there's no specific legislation to protect the heritage of 24 Sussex. There is conservation, maintenance, management, disposal of the Prime Minister's residence. There is policy for that. It depends on the Treasury Board policies for real property. Heritage was included in this policy framework in 1982 after there was an approval by Cabinet of a joint Parks Canada National Capital Commission proposal to create a federal heritage buildings policy. So that was then incorporated into the real property management policy framework. 4 years later, when it started to be implemented, 24 Sussex was designated as what we called then a classified federal heritage building, and that was the highest level of designation possible in the federal heritage buildings policy. And the reasons for that designation were because of its direct association with Canadian prime ministers, obviously, its status as a well-known national landmark, its contribution to the character of the area, which of course includes Rideau Hall. The formal heritage character statement, which is technically is approved by the minister who is responsible for Parks Canada, which has moved between ministers over time. And that heritage character statement highlights its role as a symbolic and visual landmark, the unity and balance of its facades as they now exist, and its association with the activities of prime ministers, all the receptions and so on, all the images we know, and its setting on the ceremonial route between the Governor-General's residence and Parliament. The National Capital Commission took over responsibility for the Prime Minister's residence in 1988, and the NCC adheres to these policies for federal heritage buildings. Now, in the 21st century, policies keep getting revised. There were two versions of the Federal Heritage Buildings Policy. There was one in 2006, which was replaced in 2021. And the 2021 policies have two parts. They're under Treasury Board, as I've said. First is the policy on the planning and management of investments, nothing to do with heritage, and the directive on the management of real property. So both versions of these policies require federal custodians to respect and conserve the heritage character of designated buildings under their care throughout their life cycle. And we've heard some of the references to the lack of maintenance. And to consult Parks Canada before taking action that would affect their heritage value. There is no mention in any of this policy framework about demolition, but both policies call for best efforts to identify and facilitate alternative uses, including rehabilitation and adaptive reuse, before identifying a federal heritage property for disposal under the Canada Lands Company, who is the final disposal organization for federal property. Agreements for disposal, however, must include public purpose interests and an obligation to reasonably accommodate them. So this is not about demolition. And as for my final point is, as for legislative protection, which of course is needed and has been needed for decades, Bill C-23, the Historic Places of Canada Act, is currently in second reading in the House of Commons Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. Now, if this law makes it through and is passed and bill becomes a law, this would provide legislative protection similar to and we would join all the other G7 countries to conserve the value of historic places under federal jurisdiction. And now I turn it over to Marc. Excuse me.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming today. Marc Thompson Brandt with Trace Architectures. Our role is a little bit of a story. We saw 6 years ago that there were some popular media ideas for demolition of 24 Sussex. And because of our work in heritage conservation, sustainability, urbanism, all of the points that you've heard so far really are direct aspects of our concern. So we took it upon ourselves as a firm with a lot of young staff with great energy to have a look at it and not just talk about it, but actually do something about it. We have a package here, which you're welcome to help yourselves to. Ms. Copps will hand them to you, of a proposal that restores the Prime Minister's residence following the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada, but also delivers 24 strategies for the conservation treatments of the building and 24 strategies for dealing with the sustainability and net zero carbon goal of the project. Essentially, to save an historic building, you need a use that's compatible with an historic building. And so we recognize that, unlike when Prime Minister Saint Laurent first took a residence in this property back in the 50s, today it is more than a family home. That it is expected to handle a lot of the business of the Prime Minister and the business of Parliament in the sense of receptions for VIPs, etc. So we suggested, instead of trying to make this building be something it doesn't want to be, we just allow it to stay as a single-family residence for the sitting Prime Minister, and that we build a compatible, contemporary additional building connected by underground tunnel, as there is one now going to the pool house, on the location of the pool house, reusing materials from the pool house, but building what we called the official wing. There's many details. I invite you to take a look at the package. I've been asked to speak about its architectural merits and a little bit about the site, including security. So Natalie alluded to this earlier. In my view, 24 Sussex has a layered history that tells the story of Canada. The site's overlook of the Ottawa River near the Rideau Falls ensures that Indigenous peoples from time immemorial encamped here beside these routes to the interior. The home's original construction in 1866 was for the family of a lumber baron, the scion of the water and forest resources industries that helped develop Canada's industrial base and economic strength. Later changes to the residence paralleled the changes the country and this region undertook over subsequent years. The turn of the 20th century brought a shadow-esque rehabilitation response to a place of growing importance and multiculturalism. The 1950s saw the home converted to the PM's official residence in the order and regimentation of the post-war years. This layered history is part of the national conscience, as Natalie has indicated, and continues with another new revitalization expected soon. The story of this place tells the tale of Canada's increasing international stature, as many global heads of state have visited and enjoyed the property with prime ministers of the day. As with any other building enjoying a deep rehab, it's important to find a use that aligns what can be reasonably accommodated. By situating the new wing in its location and arrangement, an architectural dialogue, if you will, can be established between the existing home and the new building, and each of the proposed functions could take advantage of their own siting. New building elements, including a proposed lookout and a circular ceremonial space at the entry, provide new opportunities to, on the one hand, highlight the site's placement along the Ottawa River and its natural beauty, the beauty, in fact, of the Canadian Shield, and to have a sacred or intimate outdoor gathering where appropriate, respectively. Now, I am not, and our firm are not, security specialists, but we have worked collaboratively over the last decade and a half with primary security specialists on numerous high-value heritage properties around the capital, requiring the highest security levels, and including in the parliamentary precinct. When security upgrade interventions are required as part of modernizing these properties, ways and means have been designed to accommodate the stringent security requirements and preserve the historic character and value. Technologies and approaches can be crafted to suit the needs of both, while keeping functionality and discretion together at the forefront. There are some brilliant minds in the security industry who, when collaborating with heritage conservation architects, find those solutions. So we are of the opinion that this is a location that can be secure. And now I'll pass it over to Russell Gibson, President from the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association.
Good afternoon. My name is Russell Gibson. I'm the President of the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association, and my purpose is to offer a local perspective. Rockcliffe Park should not be decimated by the frivolous redevelopment of this important and historic green space with the Prime Minister's residence. This is particularly so given that the 24 Sussex is in existence. Surely government should have learned from the reports about the approach of the Doug Ford government to greenbelts elsewhere in the province that the public supports the retention of green space around large cities. Rockcliffe Park is a reported site under consideration by the NCC for residents of the Prime Minister. Rockcliffe Park is located on the Sir George Etienne Cartier Parkway between Princess Avenue, Buena Vista, and Lisgar Roads. It is in excess of 100 acres, and it's an important historical asset in its own right. The park's high, rocky land once belonged to Thomas McKay, master stonemason of the Rideau Canal and the builder of Rideau Hall. Rockcliffe Park opened in the late 1800s and is one of the National Capital Region's first recreation parks. Its history, indeed, is as old as the village of Rockcliffe Park itself, dating back to the late 1800s. In author Martha Edmonds' historical account of Rockcliffe Park, A History of the Village, she's written that in the 1860s, at the intersection of Buena Vista and Lisgar Road, was a bustling entrance to an attraction, a forerunner of today's Rockcliffe Park, where eventually was installed the world's first electric merry-go-round. Thousands of people flocked to the park. Today, with the exception of the merry-go-round, not much has changed. Thousands still use this park and the Rockcliffe Park Pavilion. It's a popular location for weddings and for picnics. It would be a shame to place a security gate on the park and relegate it to use as an oversized compound for official purposes. It is also immediately adjacent to the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District, which protects green space pursuant to City of Ottawa bylaws. To which I should add, we believe, as a residents association, the NCC is also subject. The NCC does not get a pass on complying with city bylaws. The Heritage Conservation District is a unique and protected example of residences situated in a park-like setting. The NCC, as urban planner for the federal government, should lead by example. The Rockcliffe Park Residents Association urges the NCC to forego any further consideration of Rockcliffe Park for the Prime Minister's residence. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the media?
All right, so we'll start with questions in the room. Just a reminder for people on Zoom, if you have a question for the group, please raise your hand. Juste un rappel pour les gens sur Zoom, si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, levez votre main. Nous allons débuter avec la pièce. Okay, do you have a question? Edward?
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to switch this here.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead. Yeah, just shout it out loud.
Okay. Hi there, my name is Sophia with CBC Ottawa. As you mentioned, the NCC has sort of reported an estimate of around $37 million for the just not counting security costs, right? Just for fixing the main issues there. And I noticed that you mentioned that you don't find this is an accurate representation. There's a lot of contingency costs. Can you just explain why you think this isn't an accurate number and why you'd be able to do something that costs less for Canadians?
Well, I'm not sure inaccurate is exactly the word, Cynthia. What it is it's ill-defined. Deferred maintenance is probably not the right descriptor for what's included in that $37 million. So maintenance, that's a very specific thing. That's fixing drywall and windows and that sort of thing. But included in this is these contingency funds and cost allowances, and I'll speak specifically to the cost allowances because they're particularly significant, and we don't know exactly the value of the cost allowances because some of the reports we've gotten from NCC through ATIP requests have been heavily redacted. But we know there are cost allowances and we know what they're for, so I'll speak to two of those. One of those is a significant renovation within the main residence at 24 Sussex. Now, we think that's for expanded kitchen facilities, perhaps expanded hosting facilities. So they haven't designed this space yet. They've just conceived that they want to do something. So they've chosen a number, put that in the budget, and said, there's the money to do that work. The other significant cost allowance is for, nice socks, Nick, by the way, is for this new building, and it's 4,000 plus square feet, the one that Marc Brandt alluded to. This is for hosting facilities, and there'll be additional office space and that sort of thing. So there's also the cost of a brand new building in that $37 million. So again, when you subtract all the contingencies and cost allowances, it seems to us that the number is going to be very close to the 2008 estimate of $10 million. If you look at the 2018 asset portfolio condition report, which contains 70% contingency allowances and soft costs, that reduces the number in 2018 to about $10.5 million. Now, we're not saying that's what the number is today, but we feel that's a lot closer than $37 million to the actual number.
Yeah, maybe not be the right person to answer this, but I know Prime Minister Trudeau hasn't been living in here since he's been in office. What would you say to Canadians who maybe agree that there's a historic elements of 24 Sussex, but maybe think it's time to move on? I mean, our Prime Minister hasn't been here for the past 8 years. Why change it now?
Well, I guess there's a number of, I'll take it. The cost is obviously one of those items. It's going to be vastly more expensive to build a new residence, maintain two residences rather than just fix up the existing residence, which was good for all the prime ministers prior to Justin Trudeau. It was reported in 2015 that the reason he didn't move in was to allow NCC to do work on the residence. And NCC had been saying for a long time that they needed a 2-year vacancy period in the residence in order to renovate it. So he didn't move in for that reason. That's what was reported. The reports of rats and death trap and everything came after that, but that was the initial report. So work began on that this spring, and So the cost aspect, obviously, a lot cheaper, but I think the fact that it's also designated as the official residence of the Prime Minister in the Official Residences Act is also pertinent to your question.
Can I respond to that? Actually, this is about choices. And the choice that's been identified by the NCC at Rockcliffe Park is not acceptable in that Rockcliffe Park is itself an historic space that is one of the largest NCC parks in the National Capital Region. It has a history that's as old as Rockcliffe Park itself, and trading one space for another doesn't, from our perspective, is not acceptable.
Oh, sorry, I might just add that moving on, we really don't have that luxury anymore as a society. We've got to make the best use of the assets that we have, and that's really one of the reasons to stay with what we've got. And we've all heard of 10 Downing Street. The British government has maintained that building for 300 years, so there is something to be said for tradition and continuity.
Hi, Tyler Fleming with CTV News. Just talking about security, some experts have noted that the site itself might just be too narrow. It's close to the house is close to a street. It's close to a cliff and some water. Use it. Can this space be used, and can security enhancements be, what security enhancements can be made in order to protect this house and the Prime Minister?
Really, to answer your question, I'll just reiterate something I said earlier, that we're conservation architects at Trace Architectures. We're not security specialists, but we have worked with many on high-value heritage, high-secure facilities, including right on the street, the Sir John A. Macdonald building, flanked by 3 public streets, brought up to the highest level of security, including the East Block of Parliament, which is essentially right on the street as well. My point was, security consultants who really know their stuff on this, in collaboration with conservation architects and others on a project team, have found the ways, have found the personnel, the technology, the cultural heritage respect to imbue properties of much greater exposure than 24 Sussex to make them secure for parliamentarians, visiting dignitaries, the Prime Minister. So we have many precedents, and I don't see 24 Sussex being the exception that is not proving the rule, if you will.
If I can echo the comment of my... pour répéter et pour appuyer les commentaires de mon ami, pour commencer, les dimensions de sécurité ont été étudiées à fond, à plusieurs reprises. Il y a eu une analyse approfondie en 1999. Il y a eu une autre analyse approfondie en 2009. Et la chose que je peux garantir, monsieur, c'est que depuis 1999 et 2009, la promenade Sussex ne s'est pas déplacée un pouce vers la maison en question. Alors, comment se fait-il qu'aujourd'hui, on soulève des questions portant sur les dimensions de la sécurité qui sont apparemment complètement inattendues? Je peux souligner, c'est vrai, le royaume de la sécurité a beaucoup changé depuis les dernières années, mais selon les experts que nous avons consultés, le site qui est prévu à Rockcliffe Park est nullement plus avantageux que le site actuel à 24 Sussex. Okay. Does Italian come next? We have had our own security experts looking at this question as well. The question of the overall desirability of the location was reviewed at length in 1999. It was reviewed at length again in 2009. And suddenly, we are supposed to be facing security threats that did not exist before. On one hand, yes, the security universe has changed since 2009. Okay, we simply have to look at international affairs at any given time to realize that. However, we are advised by our experts that the security dimensions in Rockcliffe Park are no more advantageous than they are at the current location at 24 Sussex in terms of today's threats and risks. And I can also assure you that in terms of its proximity to the street, 24 Sussex Drive itself has not moved 1 inch closer to that building in the dark than it was in 2009 and in 1999.
So then maybe I just have a follow-up.
I'll just finish with that answer with a bit on drone attacks. This has been in the news, and everybody's aware of this since the Ukraine war started. We've had meetings with people who manufacture anti-drone attack systems. So these things are in use. They're deployed all over the world. One of the companies that we met with actually supplies their equipment to Ukraine. And this system will do a number of things. It identifies the drone's location using GPS. It identifies the type of drone, the type of payload it's carrying. And it can seize control of the drone, take over control. It can also neutralize the drone, just crash it. Or it can, what they refer to as send it home, which is return it to the pilot. Their systems also identify the pilot's location. So from this perspective, 24 Sussex is entirely safe from drone attack with these systems implemented.
So my follow-up, just we're talking security. So then do you feel that this whole security issue is almost being used to perhaps push a new location?
Certainly one of the possibilities. I think the process that security experts will go through to assess the threat risk at any particular location is called a threat risk assessment. You can go online. The Government of Canada has an online tool that they use to complete a TRA. One of our partners has completed 4 TRAs this year already in connection with proposals for the Canadian government. And if you look at that, you will see that there are a large number of inputs to the TRA, and a lot of those are subjective. So what one person completing a TRA will see as an untenable location, the next person doing it will see the opposite. And so our people are saying that it very much depends on the credibility of the person who's completing a TRA, but there is no perfect TRA for any location.
En français, Frédéric avec Radio-Canada, vous êtes monsieur le seul qui peut parler en français, si je ne me trompe pas?
Non, il y en a plusieurs qui peuvent parler en français,
okay,
mais c'est lui qui est le président.
Mais monsieur Denhez, je pense que je vais vous entendre sur est-ce que vous pensez qu'il y a un appétit dans la population en général pour votre argument que c'est la rénovation qui est la meilleure option? Les gens à la maison, on se dit, nous, il faut serrer la ceinture, donc est-ce que vous pensez qu'il faut convaincre la population ou est-ce que la population sera derrière cette idée de maintenir le podcast?
Ce n'est pas de réponse facile. On n'a pas fait de sondage. Alors, je ne suis pas en mesure vraiment de vous annoncer quel est l'avis qui est partagé par la majorité de la population. Ce que je peux vous assurer, c'est que ce n'est pas strictement une seule dimension. Jusqu'à présent, on a discuté de la question des coûts, on a discuté de la question de la valeur culturelle. Tout cela est bien dit. Et puis, nous, à Historic Ottawa Development Inc., évidemment, on se penche en particulier sur la question des coûts parce que c'est notre domaine, c'est notre boulot. Or, il y a d'autres dimensions également. De la fiducie nationale, on vient d'entendre la dimension environnementale. Souvenons-nous que le parc immobilier au Canada, en laissant de côté pour l'instant la question de terrain en dessous, simplement les structures au Canada ont été évaluées à une valeur approximative de 6 000 milliards de dollars. Ce sont les biens qui ont la plus grande valeur collective appartenant aux Canadiens. Maintenant, on est sérieux au sujet du développement durable ou on ne l'est pas. On ne peut pas prétendre qu'un pays comme le Canada est sérieux au sujet du développement durable si on laisse les biens les plus importants au Canada, qui sont nos immeubles, laissés simplement traîner par terre. Alors ça, c'est une dimension et je pense que ça répond vraiment aux opinions de la plupart, surtout des propriétaires au Canada. Parce que si moi, j'étais propriétaire d'une maison et je laissais mon immeuble se détériorer à ce point-là, mes voisins seraient à la porte. Alors, je soutiens que si le gouvernement fédéral croit sincèrement qu'on doit être l'exemple du bon comportement d'un pays au 21e siècle, une chose à faire, c'est de se pencher sur la question du sort de nos immeubles et de faire la chose responsable pour ces immeubles-là. Alors, est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui va correspondre aux besoins et aux sentiments des Canadiens? Je l'espère bien.
Mon follow-up, c'est pour M. Brandt en français. No, I can ask. Okay, I can ask you in English if you want to step to the podium. This is all nice. Your colleague over here is saying that the renovation should cost $10 million instead of the 37. How much would this cost?
This hasn't been costed yet. Let me explain. This includes both the renovation of the existing residence, whether it's 10 million or whatever that number is, and a new facility, which, as Ken has indicated, was included in the 37. Okay? So certainly, we don't expect it to be more than 37, but that will depend on many, many things. These are concepts. They have not been taken to the next level. In our world, as architects, the very first estimate, which is based on a concept, is what we call an order of magnitude. 25% either way, right? Then we push it closer and closer. Of course, in the media and in popular imagination of the public, it's hard to play that out because people hear a number and expect that's the number. But it will evolve through the design stages of the project as well.
Okay, well, can you be a bit more precise there? Are we talking about a project of $10 million in your opinion and in your renderings? Or are we more talking about a $37 million project and this is what the Canadian public should expect?
We prepared the concept in order to get the dialogue going because it was stuck. It was stuck. Either we demolish this building and build new, or we abandoned the site. And to us, neither one of those options was acceptable in any way, shape, or form. So our idea was to propose this concept to say, what about something like this? And let the powers that be then retain professional consultants to take that concept and start to make it real, do cost estimating, do design development, get it brought forward. Certainly, from our perspective, not as cost consultants, because no matter what anyone tells you, architects are not cost consultants. They're not specialists in costs. They work with cost consultants, and they have, like our firm has 40 years experience, so you get to knowledge it in some way. But in my view, this would be less than $37 million for the whole package. That includes the renovation, preservation of the existing building, and to build a secondary wing. However, that has not been proven. So we are not here saying we can do this for $37 million. No, that's not what we're doing. Okay?
Is it possible to Madame Bull in French on the environmental aspect? Très important. Expliquez-nous, selon vous, vous dites qu'il y a l'argument environnemental à considérer. Pour les émissions de gaz à effet de serre, ce serait meilleur pour l'environnement une rénovation. Expliquez-nous là, votre argument en français.
Oui, alors maintenant, on parle de triple bottom line, la question du coût environnemental, le coût en argent, le coût culturel. Alors pour ce projet, il faut considérer tous ces coûts-là. Et au niveau environnemental, avec les dates limites comme 2030, le travail qu'on doit faire en société pour limiter les émissions de carbone, un projet comme ça, de laisser tomber ce bâtiment et de construire un nouveau bâtiment, on ignore un investissement déjà fait en carbone avec le bâtiment qui existe et on investit de plus, on utilise des matériaux nouvelles. C'est un coût en carbone qu'on doit considérer.
Minutes over time,
Oh, wow.
but I still got one more question online. You mind if we take it? Everybody's okay with that? All right, so Davis Legree will take a last question here on Zoom. Davis, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much for taking my question. I appreciate you making the time. It seems like most of the arguments made in favor of renovating 24 Sussex is kind of in comparison to a new build. But what about Stornoway? What would you say to Canadians who think, we already have an official heritage building that is currently being occupied by a political figure who's not in government? Why wouldn't we just transform that into the official Prime Minister's residence?
Anybody want to answer that?
I can make a quick comment.
Okay. Well, for starters, it would take an act of Parliament, and I don't wish trying to get a new act of Parliament through at this point on anybody. It has been the policy of all of the major countries, and certainly all the G7 countries, to provide their head of government with a residence. Now, I haven't exactly been through 24 Sussex with a tape measure, but according to one report from the National Capital Commission, the building at 24 Sussex actually has living quarters for the Prime Minister and his or her family that represent only approximately 20% of total. So we're talking about under 2,500 square feet. Now, as I say, I haven't been through the place with a tape measure. I don't know how accurate that is, but it gives you an idea that the building at 24 Sussex is not a mansion, a feathered nest for some political VIP. It is, in fact, a functioning government building. It functions poorly. Everybody that I've ever read has said that the non-family space in that building is very poorly laid out, but that's correctable. And we see that as being the opportunity here, not just basically giving up on the thing and saying, okay, we're going to pick up our football and move it elsewhere. Anybody else?
Thanks. If I can just ask one quick follow-up as well before you guys head out. Who have you engaged with in the federal government on this issue, and how have your arguments been received?
I'll just speak to that.
Sheila Copps will answer.
Yeah, I've been retained by HODI to, and as a registered lobbyist on this issue, and it's been quite interesting. And we have been in touch with the office of the first responsible minister is Minister Duclos. And so we've been in touch with his office, and the deputy minister and he are looking to establish a meeting date. So we've been in touch with them, and initially we didn't realize it would be a big public thing, but when the article of the trial balloon came out, ça fait 2 semaines qu'on a fait le ballon, il fallait que nous fassions quelque chose de plus public. Sorry.
Thank you very much. This is all the time we had. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you.